Hello and welcome to Getting Into Gaming, an awesome panel about how you can get into the games industry as an employee. This panel is sponsored by MPG, and I'm delighted to be joined by our wonderful panelists, Katie, Alex, Jaymes Chapman, and Jaymes Dodd. And we're going to say that because we're going to have two Jameses and it's going to get very confusing. So we're going to do Chappers from this point forward. So we've got Chappers and Jaymes Dodd. Welcome all.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Let's kick off then. So let's go round the group and just do some introductions. I'm going to go in the order that I'm seeing you on the screen. If you can tell me who you are, what you do, and maybe some fun fact about kind of how maybe you started off in the role that you're currently in, or your kind of way into the games industry as a whole. So Katie.
So I'm a senior recruiter. I've been at Skillsearch for about 9.5 years now, currently recruiting games programmers. And I got fed up with being shouted at in car insurance claims and decided I'd rather make people happy. So that's how I fell into recruitment, and being a geek went for games.
Always love that. Alex?
Hey, yeah, I'm Alex. I'm head of marketing at the Multiplayer Group, or otherwise known as MPG. I've worked in marketing for about 14 years now, but the games industry for just over a year. So I'm really pleased that I can sort of share my personal and professional experience with everyone today.
Wonderful. Chappers.
Hi, I'm Jaymes Chapman, best known as AKA Chappers. I've been with MPG now as head of recruitment for the past 4 years. Previous to that, I've been in recruitment for about 15 years now. Pretty similar to most people who go into recruitment, they fell into it. So prior to that, I was in the British Army. But my first exposure to the games industry was with a studio in Serbia. So I kind of went in feet first. So I'd never been involved in the games industry, predominantly tech from a recruitment perspective, but worked in a studio in Serbia called Nordius, and then left Nordius and joined MPG 4.5 years ago.
Wonderful. And lastly, Jaymes.
I'm Jaymes Dodd. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the chair about making games, the UK's leading not-for-profit representing the interests of LGBTQ+ professionals in the games industry. I'm also a partner at Martin Tripp Associates Executive Search, where I work with video game studios and businesses around the world, finding them senior hires across all disciplines, building their leadership teams, building out their studios, and doing lots of other exciting things. And I'm also on the UK Interactive Entertainment Trade Body, UKI's EDI committee and steering groups, working on projects to make the games industry an even safer and more inclusive place to work. Fun fact. I just have played, I don't think I've got one. I've just played video games since I was about 4, which is a very long time ago. Worked in tech, worked in entertainment, and it just kind of all came together. And this is now what I do.
Love it. So this event is being watched by an awful lot of LGBTQ people who may be interested in getting into the industry. Katie, really kind of broad opening question. Where should they start?
I mean, it's tough to get into if you don't come from games. There are lots of disciplines within studios that will be more open to kind of cross tech, as it were. So like DevOps, for example, people don't mind if you don't come from a gaming background in that sense. In terms of like the younger people, a computer science degree is almost essential. There's very, very few studios we see that will look at people without that kind of academic background because they just don't have the architecture behind coding, for example. There are a ton of blogs and websites and all sorts of people. We've got a guide on our own website, as you know, tips on how to get into games. But networking is absolutely key. Make connections at game studios and speak to the people that are working there, because if someone goes, oh, I've got this CV, and that person goes, oh, I've had chats with them, they really know what they're talking about, you've got a much better chance.
It's also worth noting that just from an MPG perspective, and I know there are other studios out there who've now started to develop academy programs. So similar to a graduate kind of internship, academy programs, certainly from an MPG perspective. I know Sumo Digital do it really well as well, and Ubisoft, to name a few, but bringing individuals who want to who are passionate about the games industry, cross-discipline, and bringing them into those academy programs to support their development and growth into the games industry. So that's also another footstep that could potentially be an avenue. I know MPG, I can't speak for other studios, but I know MPG, we've taken people from who haven't come from specific academic backgrounds, but are just super passionate about gaming, brought them into the academy, and it's been relatively successful for us over the due course of the past 12 months. So that's also another avenue that people could look at.
The other thing is there's so many different parts of making a game. I know when I started, I didn't have a clue how much work goes into making a game. I thought you just made a game. But when you look at all the different departments like production, design, art, QA, VFX, programming, there's so many different routes you can go down as well. Where like for example, programmers, you kind of do need the background, but there's so many other areas that you can get into that you don't necessarily have to have those technical backgrounds.
Yeah, and there are so many sort of organizations and studios, as Jaymes started touching on, which offer help and advice and starting points, and which one you choose really depends on your background, your experience level, etc. But some examples would be Into Games, who are the UK-based not-for-profit supporting people into the industry via career advice, mentorship, and project funding. Limit Break, who OMG are partners of, is a mentorship program aimed at underrepresented people working in the UK games industry. And that covers entry level right the way through to advanced industry professionals looking simply to upskill themselves. There's the End Dreams Academy, engagement and educational program. That's another one that's been set up with a mission to improve access to gaming careers through apprenticeships, graduate hiring, and amazingly paid internship initiatives. So they're not just looking for free work. And then, yeah, obviously online and uni courses, some of which are, of course, better than others. So I'd advise caution to ensure that you select the right one, perhaps with relevant affiliations to studios, etc. And Yuki, of course, is an amazing resource.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on Katie's point about networking as well, because it can seem a bit daunting about how to actually meet people in the industry. Yeah. There's tons of mostly free virtual events that you can attend, like networking events. Women in Games, for example, regularly host these online virtual expos, or if you have the ability to attend an in-person exhibition like in your area or in your country, it's a really great opportunity to go and meet. Probably recruiters will be on the stands, but people who work in those teams will be there, and you'll very quickly get an idea of what the culture is like at those companies and which ones you feel are more welcoming and approachable, and just really great ways to start getting to know people in the sector.
Yeah, we'll come on to talk about how a sort of more specifically LGBTQ people should be looking for what they should be looking for in an employer in a minute. But actually, Alex, I wanted to sort of pick up on something Katie just said about the other roles that exist in the gaming space. So I think we always think about making games as kind of like being the kind of like computery nerds and the techies and the coding and all that sort of stuff. But actually, as the head of marketing, it's important to remember that there are other multidisciplinary roles that are available in the games industry that I know typically attract perhaps more LGBTQ people in through, be it marketing or graphic design and that sort of thing.
Even recruitment.
Exactly. I was just going to say
and
that.
Recruitment.
Obviously, Chappers and I are both in the sort of business support side of the company. And yeah, there's so many different roles that you can get into. Like I mentioned, I've only been in the gaming industry for just over a year now. I previously worked for an education provider where I was helping to recruit students. Actually, that was my role, so it's sort of fitting quite nicely. But yeah, there's so many different things: operations, finance, HR. There's so many different things where you don't have to be an engineer or an artist to get into the industry. And again, it's the way that I sort of got into it was having a passion for games and looking out for roles that were coming up at companies. And I've always struggled with imposter syndrome. So even when I got offered the job at MPG, I was like, really? I'm not cool enough to work there.
You are. Of course you are.
But I think, yeah, just believing in yourself and applying and showing a passion for it is a massive step to get into the industry.
Yeah, I think passion's a really key word there. Katie, what then are employers looking for, and what makes a candidate stand out? What's the sort of secret sauce?
Researching the studio really well. If you're going to interview for a studio and you've not played their game, or if it's an expensive game, at least watch the videos. I've had someone get to a final after like 7 interviews and walked in and told the owner of a mobile game studio that they hated mobile games.
Oh my God.
Did they get the job?
No, funny enough, they didn't. That was a lot of work down the drain. But little things like that are really, really key. Know who you're speaking to. Go and look on their LinkedIn profile, see where they've worked before, see what their hobbies. Some people talk about they volunteered. Something you can kind of get that personal touch is really key. And in terms of like initial applications, tailor your CV each time. I know it can take time, but if a job spec mentions a specific thing and it's something you've done, add it into your CV or add it into a cover letter. Like, I've worked on a really similar game, or I've been playing your game for years. I would say really, really beneficial things.
Chappers, from your side of the fence then.
Katie's absolutely right. But sort of digging in a little bit deeper, perhaps with some examples, it always amazes me. So for instance, if you're going for a UX UI role, they'll likely want to see a solid portfolio, which clearly shows your work and is presented to a level suitable for the level of the role. I think that's really key. I say that as they'll see your portfolio, including the effort that you have or haven't gone into presenting it as an example of your work and skill level, often assuming that that's as good as it gets. So it's really crucial people put the time in. If it's coding or engineering, it depends really, obviously, on the role and the specialism, but broadly an ability to code in their preferred languages and making sure that's really obvious. And if relevant, the appropriate engines, things like rapid prototyping, etc. I'm always asked about. And obviously, again, if it's a part of the live team that you're interviewing for, there are so many types of coding roles, but you'll just need to make sure that you have got the relevant experience coding for servers, etc. And just really making it clear that you have the ability and either the experience, depending what level we're talking at, or the passion.
It's incredible how many CVs we see come through where people haven't put the engines that they're using at the studios. Yeah. We know, because we work with so many of them, we know, oh, okay, that's Unity, oh, that's Unreal, or that's their own proprietary one. But put it on the CV, because we know it, because I'm speaking to these people all the time, but some studios might not know what that other studio happens to be working in. So I think, exactly. And it's a really simple thing to add that a lot of people do miss.
Put it on your LinkedIn. Put it on your LinkedIn. You might not be able to divulge what you're working on, but you can almost always diverge what you're working in.
Yeah, absolutely. Unless
Chappers,
you're a stealth company, apparently.
From your side of the fence, Chappers, then how does the candidate stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, everything that you've all touched on there, but I think ultimately for us, it's be authentic and honest. Certainly from things that you've done or things that you want to do moving forward. I mean, one of the many great things about MPG, and Kate will probably vouch for this, is that we're super inclusive, and just because you've come from a specific walk of life doesn't mean to say that you wouldn't have a chance to have a conversation with MPG. But also, touching on one thing that you mentioned there, we've had people put forth to us or go through an application process that didn't know very much about what we do. It's very important that you invest that time in understanding what organization you're reaching out to. So an example would be MPG. We don't own any of our own IP. We are a full dev, co-dev, outsourced solutions. I know we'll touch on this later on around what we do. We've had people come through interviews and go, "Oh, you made Fall Guys." And we're like, "Well, no, we didn't make Fall Guys. We support the multiplayer engineering of Fall Guys." But just having that understanding, and again, for the sake of repetition, what you James and Kate mentioned there is just have a really deep understanding of what organization you're reaching out to, understand their IP, or if they don't have their own IP, etc., etc. So I think we've pretty much touched on those, but honesty and authenticity is probably there with us.
Katie, you mentioned about putting the engine on the CV. So what are some top tips for people to go and give their resume or CV, depending which side of the pond you're on, a little polish?
Make it clear. A lot of people get someone else to read it through. Actually, it's probably the first thing, because you'd be amazed, even if you just put it into Word and do a spell check on it, the amount of CVs that come through. We've had them come in for QA testers, and they've sent them to a client, and the client's come back and gone, well, no, there's three mistakes in the CV, and they want to do quality assurance. You're like, oh yeah, okay, that's a really valid point. Personalize it, add a statement about yourself. Again, that you can tweak depending on the studio and the role to make it more appealing to them. It's a really easy, quick tweak to a CV you can make depending on the role. Try not to clutter it either. And personally, we prefer things. My personal opinion is your current role top and go down. Otherwise, the recruiter's going or the person interviewing, they're going all the way to the bottom to see what you're doing.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's probably one of my best ones.
And I remember when I was in school, it was always kind of a bit of a debate about how long you make your CV. I know in America, and we should recognize that there's a significant chunk of US people watching this. Hello. that are going to be talking about resumes, and I know that is strictly two sides. But they kind of build in some extra space with margins and that sort of thing as well.
I think most CVs tend to come through two sides. It depends how much detail you go into, and that depends how much you can talk about based on what you've done. But I guess where a lot of that additional information comes from is portfolios, and that's where you can showcase your work and your code, or your art and things like that can all go in those additional bits. I don't think I've ever told someone to shorten their CV. I've got some that come in at 4, some that come in as half a page that you go, we need you to expand. Please expand. Please go and put dates on it. But yeah, generally, probably 1 to 2 pages is what we see most frequently. And I think people get bored reading a lot more than that.
Yeah.
I've definitely, because I'm dealing most of the time with, mid-management to sort of senior C-suite, etc. I have definitely had to tell people it's been the flip. Some you'd be amazed. I've definitely had over 14 sites before.
Wow,
and just gone,
that's way too many.
Way too much. I don't need your life history. And they're like, oh no, I haven't put my early. I'm like, we do need facts and figures and chronological order, dates, where you work, when you've done it, etc. To prove what you've done. But I don't need a giant essay because no one's going to read it.
No, it's a CV. It's not Lord of the Rings.
I was just going to say I've read books that are lengthier than that.
I was going to say, if you've got 14 pages worth, maybe do your last 4 or 5 roles that will cut, and then at the end, just list where else you've worked. And we'll discuss that in an interview. Ask me about these. Happy to talk about it. Yeah.
In the modern age, James mentioned LinkedIn earlier. In the modern age, then, is there a way of kind of having kind of like a hybrid resume or a hybrid CV where there's kind of the key highlights are kind of on the piece of paper that you submit, but then you make sure your LinkedIn is nicely up to date and has all the history on it, and you kind of have a link on your CV off to the LinkedIn.
We will often send someone's LinkedIn profile if it's a decent LinkedIn profile.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time, people actually these days, a lot of them don't even have CVs. They just download their LinkedIn profile into a PDF, which, as long as it's smart enough and it's got enough information on their LinkedIn profile, most people are happy with these days.
Well, that's wild. Chappers, from your side of the fence again, in terms of sort of getting resumes and CVs come through, what are the sort of best practices that you're seeing at the moment?
Well, I think if it's certainly within the industry we're in now, it's that having that differentiator, something that stands out. We've had a couple of, certainly within the art function and design function, we've had a couple of virtual resumes. So people have actually pinged across their resume and a recording of themselves, kind of almost a bit of a kind of a sell. Which is pretty cool. But also, as James mentioned there, making sure that you've got your portfolio attached out, whether that's to ArtStation or another relevant party to kind of have a look at portfolios. And similar to Katie, making sure that it's up to date, and it's relevant. Having as much information on there as possible that's relevant to the discipline that you're actually applying to, and making sure it's clear on there on what your intentions are moving forward. Cover letters, I'm seeing less and less of those over the past, I'd say, 12 to 18 months, but we do occasionally get them as well. But I think certainly for this industry, I think it's really, really important that you've got specific engine you've worked on, tech, coding languages, if that's engineering. If it's QA, making sure that you've got an in-depth understanding of what that looks like. Design, obviously making sure you've got relevant portfolios attached to that. For MPG as well, in some areas, it's worth noting that because of what we do, it's good to see if people have published or shipped titles on what titles they've worked on, whether that's RPGs or other genres. Making sure it's pretty clear on what you've done and what your intentions are moving forward.
Yeah, genres, etc., and what you've worked on, if you're allowed to put it. And you're 100% right, James. Absolutely crucial to, did it ship? Because the amount of times you'll see, oh, they worked on this, and then you get into the interview with them, and but they haven't worked on anything that shipped. But the current title probably is going to, or that's a bit of an extreme example, but those are experiences we have. Obviously, that saves our clients a lot of time, but it's a real pain. And also, if the person that's doing the research doesn't have an encyclopedic mind of games and studios, etc., they're going to miss loads if you don't put the title of the game that you've worked on, and maybe a little list of the types of genres you've worked on, etc. They're real quick wins.
Or hyperlink the games.
Yeah,
we get a lot of EVs coming through where they hyperlink the games.
Yeah,
which is always, because you can just open it up straight and go, oh, okay, cool.
It's that, exactly.
I think also equally important is genres that you're not overly passionate about, or certain games that you don't really think that you could work on ethically. We've had a number of interviews over the years where individuals coming through the interview process have suggested that they won't work on certain games. So that's always a good thing to have as well, just so that we're covering all bases and we're not effectively wasting people's time if they're the only kind of genre games that we're actually working on. So I think that's equally as important.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think some people see job searching, job finding, CV writing, resume preparing as a sales pitch, and it's make or break, and I have to kind of put everything they want me to put. But if you're honestly going to get the job, walk in, sit down and go, I hate making gambling games, or I hate making fighting games, then you're wasting your time and everyone else's time, and you're going to have a very miserable 6 months and then leave. In some ways, honesty again is the best policy, and be realistic about what you're looking for. It's a two-way street. I've always personally, even as a job hunter, I've always treated job hunting as a two-way street. They have to like me, but I have to like them.
That's what we have to teach some other clients, is as much as you're interviewing them, they're also interviewing you. You're not the only studio they're going to be speaking to. You've got to sell yourselves as well. And it has to be a conversation as opposed to an interrogation when it comes to interviews.
We often find that people are afraid to put things that they won't work on, genres, etc., because they think, well, then they'll just look past me. So one of our screening questions on the initial, reach outs, etc., is it always has that, are there genres, etc., that you just won't work on, or you're not at all interested in. Often shooter these days comes up a lot, even if they've worked on a load, but because they've started to think, they've got perhaps a little bit older, thinking perhaps a little bit more ethically. I speak as someone who loves pretty much all games, but
you do strike me as a Call of Duty player, I have to admit.
Can I add one thing around just sort of
Yes.
if you're starting out and polishing up your resume, coming back to that? I know I talked about trade shows before, but one thing that we offer at our virtual and in-person events is normally our talent team are there offering CV reviews and portfolio reviews. So, and I know it's something that other studios offer as well. So just, a friendly chat with our team, you can bring your portfolio with you and they can sort of sense check it for you. So, it doesn't have to be that you're applying for one of our games. It really is just a bit of help to see like you've missed this off or don't include that, for example. And yeah, it should be, that's whether you're trying to get into the industry or perhaps you've worked in another tech field and you want to come over. That's a really helpful thing to do for you.
Yeah, a lot of recruiters will do that as well. We'll get people reach out
Yes,
going,
yeah.
can you just run your eye over this? It's like, yeah, because it takes us 5 minutes to be like, that looks good, take that out. Or yeah, that's great, but add this in. It just takes 5 minutes and 95% of us are happy to do it, I'd say.
Yeah.
Just don't find the 5%.
Yeah, just don't find that 5%.
Wonderful. Some really, really valuable tips then. I think something that a lot of people watching this can definitely go and take away. I said I'd come back to it. So I'm going to go to Jaymes. From your kind of out making games hat, not from the hat, but with your hat on, what should LGBTQ people look for in an employer? If people watching here are going, well, I really want to come and work for MPG, or I really want to come and work for EA or whoever, how do they then kind of like, we know the big companies, but maybe the smaller kind of mid-tier companies or the support companies or whoever, how do you kind of advise that they could just kind of run the rule over what's available and what really makes a good employer for LGBTQ people?
Sure, it's a really good question. I'd say look for evidence that they are an inclusive business. So a robust DEI policy, and depending on the size, perhaps a DEI officer or similar. Affiliation with LGBTQ plus organizations, like Out Making Games, but etc. Whether they have an active LGBTQ plus group, whether they have positive support policies for LGBTQ plus and minority groups, evidence they support LGBTQ plus during Pride Month, but also beyond that, that their output, of course, isn't anti-LGBTQ plus, as some can be, and really whether they have strong anti-bullying policies and procedures in place and have clear lines through to who you report any issues or concerns to. Those would just be a few examples that spring to mind immediately.
Alex, in terms of, sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, I was going to say.
Literally, I was about to come to you, so you go.
I was going to say all of those things as well. I think it's looking to see if the company aligns with your values. So for me, for example, I love that MPG is climate positive. Like we do a lot around giving back and being a really inclusive place to work. It was really important for me when I was looking for another job. And don't be afraid to ask about these things at your interview either. You'll soon spot the red flags. If you're asking about, very simple things that I think should be thought about by all employers, and they can't give you an answer or they're a bit iffy about it, then you soon know this might not be the place for you.
Yeah. I was going to ask actually a similar sort of question to you, Alex. So as the kind of the marketer, how do you make sure that your company sort of stands out and is pro diversity, pro LGBTQ, pro just a positive force?
Yeah, well, similar to what Jaymes said, really, we are openly supporting different ally organizations. So this event, for example, is a perfect example. And we recently became Women in Games corporate ambassadors as well. But we don't want that to just be seen as a marketing tool, which I know it can be for some studios, but we have a very robust diversity and inclusion policy that we have in place, and we've got a great team, that steering committee that work on that regularly. We're doing more all the time. We recognize that we're not perfect. We're trying to build on that. We are introducing ambassadors for different groups. But also we've got some people within the company that are happy to share their experiences as LGBTQ plus gamers and developers. And this isn't something that we've forced upon anyone. We've offered it out to different people. And because people at MPG genuinely like where they work, they're happy to come forward. There's no forced fun at MPG, as we say. But yeah, I think have a look if there are people, and particular senior leaders in the company, if they're out there talking about what they do and how they themselves are supporting the industry, then that's really important. And it's part of our annual goals and objectives as a company to help the industry be more equitable as a place. So it's something that we take very seriously.
I think you're really right, and I think it's important that a lot of companies, we speak to a lot of people, and I think, yeah, I mean, again, thank you for sponsoring this event and making it happen. But you're doing more than just throwing money at the community. You're really kind of investing in it and making sure that you're supporting it, and even the value of this panel alone is high to a lot of people. But I think when we first started Gayming, I remember I won't name the company, even though it's a positive story, but the first company that we kind of worked with came to us with a really cool story about how their Pride group had just raised a few £1,000s in the UK here for an LGBTQ charity through their annual Pride event. But it's the first time they externally spoke about it. They'd run the Pride event for like 3 or 4 years, but this is the first year they actually wanted to externally talk about it, and they were really worried about that kind of being sort of like, is that a bit gauche? Is it a little bit, are we kind of being tokenistic? And it's like, no, you have to tell those stories. You have to celebrate the fact that you're raising money, you're supporting your staff. It's good news. But they were really, really worried when we first kind of spoke to them about it all, about even putting it out there. And I find that wild.
Yeah, you're right. And I think there's, one thing that we've recognized as a company is we are doing a lot to support the different groups within the organization. And as senior managers, we're aware of those things, but perhaps the people, who are actually making the games don't necessarily know all these things all the time. So that's one thing that we're working on getting better at, is communicating that internally, because there are so many great things that are going on, but we just haven't felt the need to shout about it or to sort of tell everyone about it regularly. But I think we need to do more of that, because I think something like 50% of our hires, I mean, James Chapman can correct me on this, but come from referrals. So people within the company referring MPG is a great place to work. And that's a massive part of what it is to be at MPG.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's correct. Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing achievement for us, certainly. I mean, I was employee number 17 into MPG, and I think we're now kind of we're around about 370 people now globally. So, and the majority of our funnels are, from a talent perspective, are through referral process and external hiring. So it's a great showcase and piece for us as an organization. And I'm sure there are other organizations out there that have similar as well, but making sure that everything's visible and people wouldn't be referring these individuals into the business if they didn't feel comfortable doing so. I think it's also just to touch on this subject slightly, and I know my team and are really amazing at this, but we're always kind of ever evolving when it comes to this initiative and making sure that I think companies have equal opportunity statements on their websites. We're doing an awful lot of training, certainly for the talent team, because it's the beginning of the funnel from a hiring perspective, that we're all doing LGBTQ and plus inclusive training. Also discussions around unconscious bias. So all of these initiatives are in place to make sure that we are knowledgeable when it comes to doing these type of initiatives.
I think absolutely. I think James was mentioning about sort of look at the policies, look at this, look at that, and I think it's absolutely true. But I think the company has to be forward with putting that information out front and center as well, so people can actually go and find it. Katie, when you kind of work to place people with employers, is there? You probably can't answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there a time, or is there any instances where you've sort of thought, I'm not going to go and put that person in that company, or there might be a problem there, or at least you've maybe steered people around?
I've not had that. I've more had it, I think, kind of the opposite way. It's like, oh, I think this person will fit in really well there because of these reasons. Then I've spoken to the person, they've gone, yeah, actually, do you mind letting them know that I identify as non-binary and queer because they do this campaign, and I'd like, that's somewhere I'd really want to work. And I was like, absolutely. And obviously that's not something we release that information when we're sending submissions. We only if someone says, yes, I'm happy for you to tell them. Obviously when you're sending LinkedIn profs as well, it can sometimes be very obvious. But yeah, we, in terms of, I just don't think we have the clients that we work with are like that. So it's not something that I've come across.
Good. I mean, I asked the question
great.
specifically as a kind of bit of a little bit of a sort of provocative one. I apologize, but I think it's good to hear that the opposite is more the case of being able to steer people and kind of really recommend them because they fit the mold really well.
I think companies are much more shouty about it now as well, which makes our life so much easier. Because it used to be a lot of people have these policies and be doing these events, but no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
So you can go, oh, they're really good because of this, and the candidate will go and look and go, well, where is the evidence of it? It's like, oh, well, they told me they did it, but it's go and shout about it. I've got another client who, in the bottom of their job ads, and I really like this, says that if you've got read this far, 60% of women and underrepresented folks will think they've not hit enough boxes and won't apply. Please apply. We want to speak to you. We believe that more diversity brings a better game anyway. And I really love that they're acknowledging that, and apparently it's a fact that women do it more, that we'll get to the bottom. And if we've hit less ticks than the men, we will go, oh, well, we won't apply. The men would hit that many ticks and they would go, oh, well, I'll apply anyway. So I really love that they're that out there with those kind of statements. And I think more companies need to be doing that.
Yeah, Katie, you've really hit on something there. There's the whole thing of using masculine language, feminine language, etc. Although I can't remember the exact numbers, but the stats are very close to those, if not exactly those. And we're forever, working with our clients to reshape the language that they're using to stop the female or the minority groups, etc., dropping off. Whereas, the vast majority of men just go, oh, yeah, I've got that. I am a man. I can say it like that. I'll apply. So you just have to think of so many different things. And, whether it's an internal team or an external team, there's a lot of advice out there to make things better.
Yeah.
So, I think we've kind of maybe run into the next question in some ways about how can people tell, but I think let's then kind of leap on to we've just started to touch on it a little bit. So I'm going to go to Jaymes and Chappers, the two Jameses for this question. What are some of the best ways that an employer can support their LGBTQ staff?
Do you want me to start, Chappers?
Yeah, feel free. Yeah.
Okay. So provide safe spaces, a confidential contact to report problems, issues or concerns to, perhaps educate teams via town halls or training sessions on how to be an LGBTQ+ ally and a diversity ally in general, actually. That's touching on something you mentioned earlier, Robin, but I was at a very interesting UK EDI committee meeting last week. And Studio were very concerned that they were putting on an LGBTQ positive internal event, but they didn't want it to look like tokenism. And one of the responses was, well, put that on. That's fantastic. Put on like a Black History Month event. Doesn't have to be during Black History Month. Put on a whole bunch of different events and shout from the rafters about it. That is a massively positive thing externally for people that might be looking to get into the business, but also will empower your teams internally as well. What else? Encourage LGBTQ plus and diverse working groups. Did I say that? Ensure that there is positive content in their products and titles. Support LGBTQ+ charities or groups. A big one for me is use pronouns irrespective of your sexuality, so people feel safe sharing their own, aren't misgendered, and everyone else feels comfortable knowing how they should refer to others. That one for me is just a win-win. I've also got a client, and I found it, I suppose, quite moving. They've got, just in their e-signature, there's just a little ally tag. And that lets people know, externally and internally, that they're a safe person to go to. Those are just a few things that I thought of, but I think that one's just a really lovely thing that businesses could do really easily.
Yeah, I think the one point you make there really quickly, sorry, was actually around supporting all the different months throughout the year in the calendar. I think it's also important to, I think Alex mentioned it earlier, about supporting stuff outside of Pride Month as well, particularly for the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. You look
No, it's fine.
And the
sorry.
You can share it.
We can share it.
And I think it's important, because I think not only from a gaming point of view, from our point of view, obviously we're doing Gaming Live. This is October right now. It's September, which is a pre-record, but it's actually October when this airs. And our gaming awards take place in April. So everything we do pretty much is outside of Pride Month, specifically to allow companies the opportunity to come and support stuff that's not allied to Pride Month. And I think we need to see more of that related to be it sort of Black History Month, but fine, but also let's celebrate the Black community outside of Black History Month. We have a Disability Month, but also let's celebrate the disabled people outside of Disability Month. And there's so many different things that I think can happen. Sorry, Chappers, I spoke over you.
No, that's fine. And in fact, everything that you've mentioned there is obviously massively important. And I think awareness and visibility comes to mind as well. So that could be in the lines of having policies and procedures in place to support LGBTQ and their needs. I think I mentioned on the previous question around awareness, around making sure we're offering specific training as well, because there are people out there that aren't, we've got people in the business who just like to do what they like to do, and engineer or crack on with what they're supposed to be getting on with. But making sure we're giving the opportunity for those people to come to, the unconscious bias training, LGBTQ inclusive training, and just making sure that that's being cascaded from leadership down as well. It's not just something that people can look on our wiki page and see. Making sure that the leadership team are speaking about this at company monthlies or events that we're holding. So yeah, I think that's massively important as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the leadership team is a hugely important factor in this. I mean, I've never worked in a company that is so inclusive, and equally, I've never worked in a company where I truly believe that the leadership team care about each and every person at the company. And obviously that comes through good hiring, but equally they are not the sort of people to shout about it. But if you had a chat with them, you'd pick up on that straight away. And yeah, it's massively important for trickling down into the rest of the business.
I think it's really important where in a company, particularly a company of size, where the DE&I team sits. And I think sometimes that obviously then depends on where the HR team sits potentially as well. And I think I was on a podcast not long ago with the head of diversity at Xbox, and they put their, obviously significantly larger organization, but they put their D&I team in the chief exec's office. So it is literally, I was sat listening to her on the podcast, and literally she's looking at Phil Spencer's office door. Like it's that kind of close to the CEO to really embed that from the top down. Because I do see a lot of companies that D&I kind of gets maybe to middle management and then goes downwards, but it's very rare that you can kind of push diversity upwards and make change up. So I think, yeah, top down commitment, I think, is vital.
Yeah, I think you've also got to look at the makeup of your teams, particularly, we're talking about people getting into jobs, etc. If your recruitment team or, people near to it don't truly reflect what's out in the real world, often, we've all got our own biases, or our unconscious biases, hopefully. How can you truly for instance, Trip Associates, our team's 50-50 gender split. I think 2/3 are from minority ethnic backgrounds. Actually, it's almost half the team right now. And 1/3 is LGBTQ plus. That's a real mix. So, and we each come with our own backgrounds and experiences. So when we're out there looking for people, we are naturally linked to different groups, different networks, etc.
Yeah.
We'll pick up on different things and attract different people back in for the clients. And it's the same, if it's a big studio, if possible, that needs to be reflected within the team as much as possible as well.
I know I speak to a number of certainly like the smaller studios who every time they're like, please send me more diverse candidates. I need more women. We need something. He's like, I can't just have another white man. He's like, just anything. And although that you don't want to do positive discrimination, but there are a lot of companies out there that massively want to diversify. Mm-hmm. So it's and knowing that, then when we are speaking to those people, we can be like, look, I know these people, they will support you, they will, they're desperate to widen their own knowledge and make better products because of it. So I think it's having those conversations with clients as well and being like, you just need to shout about it. I think that, we want diversity, we support diversity. Come work for us.
I agree.
I think I've learned from this panel that I'm going to shout about it more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something to really commit to, but by all means keep sponsoring gaming events.
Yeah.
But the whole point I think of this is about being more visible, about kind of really competing, because I think it's in the same way that people compete for jobs. I do sometimes feel like a lot of companies need to compete for employees. And we obviously are fully aware that there is a sort of significant challenge when it comes to female representation in the games industry. There's a significant challenge when it comes to POC representation in the industry. And I think a few people have said it already, and it's a bit of a catchphrase of mine that I kind of shoehorn in at any given moment, but it's diverse companies make diverse games. It's just how it works. You can't not do that. It will just happen by default. So I think that's I think we've had a really good chat there about sort of both sides of the fence, of both from an LGBT employee point of view, but also from an employer point of view. A lot of people are probably sitting here thinking, do I go and work at an indie or do I go and work at a AAA? And I can see the benefit of both. And I can see that maybe the indie sort of lets you help get your feet under the table a little bit quicker, probably a little bit more niche, maybe a bit more supportive in that sense. But then a AAA comes with the money, frankly, to implement all the wonderful things we've been talking about with like ERG groups, resource groups, pride activities, big events, etc. So Katie, and then probably a bit of Alex, James, other James. What to you then is the difference technically, but also then kind of specifically from an LGBTQ plus employees point of view?
Technically, in terms of probably almost, especially coming across like art or programming, if you're in a big AAA, chances are you're going to work on a very specific part of a game. If you're working at an indie studio, you're going to touch on a lot more of it, even all of it. You'll be a decision maker. You'll be involved in those decision processes rather than just being told, I need you to make this character do this. So it's kind of a bit more freedom in that sense. Both absolutely have their pros and cons if everyone wants to have their name on, one of the massive AAA games. But also you can have a lot more input at an indie studio. And a lot of the indie studios are producing incredible games as well that are on a level with the AAA. Just take a bit longer. In terms of LGBTQ, I think kind of as we've all said, they've got the money and they've got the amount of people to be able to create these networks. If you're the only person in a 6-person studio, kind of you are your own support network with the people you're working with, and as you grow, that should hopefully grow, but you won't necessarily have HR, you won't necessarily have those policies in place. That's something that you might yourself go, do you know what, I'd love to be at the forefront of getting these things right in a studio, so go join an indie and become that like spokesperson within that studio, and you can create those policies and build as the studio builds.
There's also a significant chunk now of diverse indie studios. So there's a significant chunk of LGBTQ indie studios out there. There's a significant chunk of other different sort of diverse groups. And I think sometimes the opportunity to go and work in perhaps an all LGBTQ studio, be it 3 or 4 people, could be incredibly liberating and could be incredibly creative.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well done, Katie. That was... If there's anything else we can kind of add on to the back of that, that's, I mean, for someone, obviously yourself, been in the games industry a lot longer than certainly myself and Alex, you there's a reason why we work with Skillsearch.
Thanks, James.
James, from your side then, how do you sort of see placing people?
Yeah, I mean, Katie's done a slam dunk there. So all of that, Katie. I don't really know what I can add. Obviously, there'll be ERG groups at AAA, but and I think one of you mentioned, you know, there might not be HR, or there regularly isn't HR in an indie. Although that said, I'm working with an indie startup at the moment, and they actually had me in to do an EDI chat with the team the other day. And they've just hired just a 1 day a week, or I think it's 1 day a week, HR manager.
Wow.
So yeah, and they are really forward thinking. You know, they've used me for 4 or 5 roles now, specifically to find diverse candidates. So so they are out there. You know, I think it kind of circles back to what we started with. Every sort of AAA, AA, if we dare use the phrase, and it always used to be, you know, they've got this over this. This one, AAAs have got tons of money. You're going to be really bored probably, but you're going to make some cash. But you're going to be working on games that perhaps you really want to work on. And, you know, you'll get a name for yourself, etc. potentially. Indies, you know, often tiny games. Actually, as Katie said, not so much anymore. They make some amazing stuff that's right up there with AAAs. But, you know, do they have the money? Who knows? Is it going to be a short-lived role, but one that you're going to learn from? Potentially. But you can really be your authentic self, most likely at that studio, assuming, you know, you've done all the sense checking that we've talked about earlier during this, because otherwise you could be, you know, really in the soup. But yeah, I think Katie pretty much said it all.
Awesome. Gold star to Katie.
Yeah,
you're welcome. So let's talk specifically about MPG, just to finish this off. We've got like about 6-7 minutes left. So Alex and James, tell us a bit more about MPG itself. So you mentioned obviously earlier that it was a dev and co-dev studio. You don't have any of your own IP. What does that mean for someone that's kind of a bit more layperson, perhaps looking in? And give us maybe a little potted history of where where MPG has come from.
Do you want me to kick this off, Alex?
Yeah, you go for it. I'll carry on.
With regards to MPG's history, so the idea was born from a trip to GDC back in 2018 by one of the founding members, Rick Alexander. He basically went to a GDC with 2 sets of business cards because he previously worked for Superpunk Games, which was one of his organizations, and he had an idea around supporting lots of game studios, publishers have or what they think is an easy option of making a multiplayer game. They think it's they come to us and say, can you press the multiplayer button and make us multiplayer? Now, we all know, being in the games industry, that it's not as easy as that. So Rick had the idea around supporting from a core dev perspective back then. That's predominantly what we were doing, is just core dev. He went to GDC, did a little bit of kind of networking around there, speaking to some clients, etc. Jumped back on the plane to the UK, and I think he had around about 3 or 4 voicemails from potential clients who wanted to know a little bit more about what the multiplayer group could do back then. So off the back of that, MPG was born. So predominantly what we do is we support AAA game studios and publishers with every facet of multiplayer engineering, networking, design, art, QA that's necessary. So we support those type of organizations. Go into it as a partnership, so it's never we give you a piece of work, there you go, and we go away and do it. We embed ourselves into the teams and support from remote servers. We've since evolved from just co-dev. We're now working on full dev, so we're working on some full SKU projects because we've done such a great job of supporting those studios and publishers. And again, predominantly back in the day, we were more engineering focused than any other discipline. But now we've since evolved, and I think I mentioned previously that we're around about 370 plus people now and growing. So we have, I would say, percentage-wise, 70% is engineering. The rest is kind of made up of all of the other disciplines that we know within the games industry, so art, design, production, and QA. And, we continue to support our clients and publishers globally with their multiplayer necessities.
Yeah, that's right. Well said. I think, for anyone that wants to know, logistically, our head office is in Nottingham in the UK, but our team is remote friendly, based all over the world, which we take quite seriously in terms of we want people to have that flexibility in their work-life balance, but equally want people to know that they can meet up with their teams if they want to. So we give people budget every year so that they can do just that. If you play video games, you probably will have played one of the games that we've worked on, but one thing that makes my job quite difficult is that we can't talk about a lot of them being co-development projects. But that is changing sort of as MPG grows. And, in the last year or so, there's been some really big names that have games that have come out that we can mention. So, for example, Call of Duty or Starfield, which isn't multiplayer, but we helped on that one. And Mortal Kombat that's just come out as well is a big one that we helped. And, that's a big part of my role is not just attracting new talent, but is also about attracting new clients as well. And I have to say, having these really important policies around being LGBTQ friendly or how you protect the planet and anything like that is actually really important to the clients as well. So, when we go to the likes of GDC and have our exhibitions down there, I might not necessarily be shouting about which games we've worked on. I am more shouting about, the fact that we've got 24 mental health first aiders, and we've just become, Women in Games partners, and with the fact that we were sponsoring events like this, and all the things that we do for our people, because it's actually the people that make us really special, I think. It's the skills and the people that we've got that make MPG who we are.
Well, you beat me to my last question, which is I was going to point to you, Alex, and say what makes MPG special. But
sorry,
the people is the answer. But no, anything. We've obviously spoken a lot about the sort of positive stuff that the MPG is doing for the both internally and externally. And we've spoken obviously about, as you say, the people, the support the support given, etc. So, just is there any kind of last little bit that you wanted to kind of shout from the rooftops about? Talking about needing to shout from the rooftops a bit more.
I'd say they're great to work with. In all honesty,
I mean, yeah.
Thanks,
no, from a candidate perspective, they move fast. So fast they want to almost scare the candidate off, but no, they move fast. Really good feedback. If they want someone, and they get them. So I'd say you'll get a good experience interviewing with them.
Yeah, I
mean, surely a big sell to any candidate will be the fact that they get to work potentially, I assume, across a real mix of games with massive
absolutely.
That's the other thing I was going to say.
Oh my god!
I think it'd be hard done by to kind of go anywhere else and not have the exposure that you'd have here at MPG to work on multiple projects. That's one of the many great things about MPG, and again, I can't can't say this enough around the people. You know, we've got a really, really great retention strategy in place. Our attrition is really, really low, and that speaks volumes. I think personally, because it's certainly in such a volatile industry where the talent landscape itself is relatively small in comparison to the wider software and technology, I suppose, sphere. So yeah, I think that kind of speaks volumes for itself. And kind of touching on one of the things that we mentioned at the beginning of this is, if you want to have a conversation with anyone in my team from a talent perspective, go to our careers website. So it's the multiplayergroup.co.uk/careers. We have general application process in there. 50% of my team represent LGBTQ plus. So please, if we can't offer you a role, we will support you in any way, shape, or form we possibly can.
Wonderful.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for everyone. This has been a really great panel. Just to wrap everything up, I'm going to go through our panelists in reverse order. So I'm coming to you, Jaymes, first. And tell us where people can find you, where people can find out more about whoever you're representing. And I know we've spoken a lot about a lot of amazing tips and advice, but if we are going to leave with your last little golden nugget that's kind of fallen out of this panel, what would it be?
Okay, this is Jaymes. So
You're Jaymes.
I'm Jaymes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm Jaymes Dodd. So you can reach me at Outmaking Games, which my email is jamesdodd@outmaking.games, or you can reach me at jamesdodd@tripassociates.co.uk. Oh my gosh, there was just so much good stuff in here. Potentially, and other Jaymes said this, but it's something I see again and again. Just go and play the games that these people make, or go and find out about them. Really, dive in, work out whether you really enjoy playing these games, whether you'd enjoy making these games. And then when you get to that interview, you'll then truly be your authentic self. And that is half the battle just half, but it's half the battle at any interview.
Brilliant. Chappers?
Yeah, so you can reach me at Jaymes Chapman at mpg.io, or alternatively, feel free to, what I mentioned previously, go to the Multiplayer Group Careers website on our website. Feel free to connect into everybody in my team. Again, more than happy to have conversations and broaden our network. Happy to have conversations, meaningful ones, around supporting people getting into the industry, along with support on CVs, similar to what Katie mentioned earlier, and Alex. More than happy to. I'm an open book, and I'm here to support. That's what my role is. The golden nugget, I think we're all in an agreement of this, is honesty and authenticity is the key. Honestly, if you want to work on a specific genre or don't, please just be authentic and honest and upfront. And I just want to say it's been a pleasure being part of this panel. So thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure. Thank you. Alex?
Thanks, Jaymes. Yeah, I would say connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to. Equally, we are going to be at the Mega Migs event in Montreal in November, back at GDC in in March, and at Develop Brighton next July. So if anyone is watching this and comes over to see us at one of those shows and says that you've watched this panel, I will probably cry with joy. So, but yeah, no, I think the one thing that I would say is, don't be afraid to choose a job and a company based off your beliefs and, what will make you happy, because, I didn't necessarily believe it before I came to MPG, but there are businesses out there that are really nice and do have a nice culture. So don't choose something that's not going to make you happy.
Wonderful. Katie?
Yeah, so Katie Jones again. You can find me at kj@skillsearch.com. We have tons of blogs and tips and advice on getting into the games industry, CVs, portfolios for various different art styles as well, all on our website. So go and have a good hunt around. My marketing team will kill me if I don't mention our salary and satisfaction survey, which we do every year as well. We will be releasing that again later in the year, and we'd love to get some more questions in around diversity and what people are looking for this year as well. Biggest takeaway from this, it's just been really good, and I think Jaymes kind of stole my one, is just research the studios properly. Don't tell a studio that you hate the games they make at the final interview. Yeah, that's it. But yeah, this has been really, really good. I was really nervous, and it's been lovely. I've loved it.
Yeah.
You did.
Thanks,
you did awesomely, and you did awesomely. And thank you so much. This has obviously been incredibly valuable. I think my one takeaway out of everything is get your digital footprint in order. Don't be the QA applicant that puts a CV in where your LinkedIn's riddled with QA issues. Make sure you've put on your LinkedIn the engines that you work with, the code that you write in, the background that you have. Build out people very easily now can search the internet and find you. So make sure that your digital footprint is in good order as well. This has been Getting Into Games. Thank you so much again to our wonderful panel, Katie, Alex, Jaymes, and other Jaymes. We will wish you all the best for your job hunting, and with that, I'm going to hand over back to the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Honestly,